Lesson 10. How to avoid conflicts provoked by others. Not all conflicts you encounter in life arise from your own reactions, emotions, or symptoms. Quite often, a conflict starts on the other person's side, someone who is already agitated, frustrated, lost, or simply aggressive. Some people ask questions not to understand, but to confuse you or put you on the spot. Others use sarcasm, little digs, power games, dominance tests, or they deliberately try to evoke an emotion in you that you do not need. Life is not made up only of supportive people. There are also those who cannot handle their own tension and discharge it onto others. This is why a person living with schizophrenia must be able to recognize when a conflict is external and does not belong to them, and must know tools that protect them from being pulled into someone else's game. The first step is recognizing that not every question is really a question. Sometimes it is an attempt at provocation, sometimes a test, sometimes a veiled accusation, sometimes a blow to your sense of worth. The person might say, "Why did you do this again?" And in their voice you hear not curiosity but contempt or irritation. Or they ask, "What's going on in your head?" when what they really mean is to put you down. It happens that someone deliberately undermines your decisions by asking loaded questions, like, "Do you even think before you do anything?" Impulsive or domineering people often try to create guilt in others, because then they feel in control. Aggressive people go on the attack when they cannot manage their own emotions. That is why you have to learn to see not only the content of what is being said, but also the intention behind it. The technique you use when you ask, "Why do you want to know?" is one of the most elegant ways to neutralize verbal aggression. Communication psychology calls this a reversal of direction. When someone tries to enter your space with a jab, you do not respond to the content, you make them explain their motive. In one moment, the roles are reversed. You are no longer the one being interrogated. The other person now has to answer a question they did not expect. This move knocks them off balance. The aggressor expects you to react emotionally, to feel guilty, to justify yourself, or to flare up. Instead, you steer the conversation toward intention. What are you trying to achieve with that question? Why do you need this information? Why are you asking in that way? These are questions that do not attack, but expose the other person's mechanism. Aggression needs fog in order to operate. When you use questions about motive, the fog disappears and clarity appears, and clarity stops the attack. In classical dialectics, this technique is called the Socratic method. Socrates did not respond to barbs, he asked questions about definitions, goals, and motives. In this way he disarmed his interlocutor, not by fighting them but by directing attention to the source of their words. In modern psychology, this tool is called a meta-question, a question about the meaning of the question. Its strength lies in the fact that an aggressive person rarely can rationally justify their intentions. They often do not even have the courage to admit that they are seeking dominance or trying to induce guilt. When you force them to reveal their motive, their aggression loses fuel. This tool not only protects you from conflict but also restores balance in the conversation. The second pillar of avoiding provocation is the ability not to step onto the battlefield. Most people respond to aggression with aggression, justify themselves when attacked, or try to prove they are right. Such reactions only deepen the conflict. In schizophrenia, they are especially risky because getting pulled into an aggressive exchange can set off spirals of stress, interpretation, and cognitive distortions. That is why the most important skill is the ability not to join the game the other person is playing. If someone jabs at you with, "You do everything wrong, you have the right to answer calmly," that's an opinion, not a fact. Can you tell me what exactly you mean? If someone says, "You always ruin the atmosphere," you can respond, "That's a generalization." What exactly do you have in mind? Such answers are not an attack, they clear the conversation of emotional fog. The third element is the ability to set boundaries. A provoking person often behaves this way because they have never encountered a boundary that would stop them. A boundary does not have to be aggressive or showy. A sentence is enough: "I won't continue this conversation in this form. Let's stop here for now. We'll talk when we're both calm." These sentences are a form of self-care. This is not running away. This is consciously stepping away from a situation in which your mental health is at risk. Aggressive people rarely manage to continue attacking when they encounter a consistent but calm boundary. In schizophrenia therapy, it is especially important to understand that provocation often has nothing to do with you. Sometimes it is the result of the other person's frustration, sometimes their exhaustion, sometimes their emotional problems. Buddhist psychology compares such situations to a stone thrown into water. The wave is the result of the stone, not the water. You are the water, the wave does not come from you. When you understand that a barbed remark says nothing about you and everything about the speaker's inner state, it is easier to stay calm. You do not need to react with your own emotion to someone else's emotion. You can look at it from a distance, as if watching a storm through a window. The storm passes, and you remain untouched. It is worth pausing for a moment on a phenomenon that appears in almost every conflict. A person usually attacks not what they truly see, but what they carry inside themselves. A barbed sentence rarely says anything about you. It usually says everything about the person who utters it. Psychology calls this projection, the unconscious transfer onto others of those traits one finds hard to face in oneself. A person who lives in doubt most often accuses others of uncertainty. Someone who is dishonest themselves readily accuses others of insincerity. Someone who has a problem with aggression often calls others aggressive. This is not a sketch of your character, it is a reflection of theirs. That is why many attacks do not truly hit you, because they concern things you do not identify with. If someone says, "You're lazy," and you know you are not, the words slide off you like off glass. If someone calls a white man a black slut, the insult has no real power. There is nothing inside him it can latch onto. It is this mechanism of self-identification that decides which words go deep and which only brush against the surface of your awareness. Those that hurt are the ones that touch something you yourself have an unresolved relationship with. Those that do not hurt are the ones that describe something you simply are not. A person provoking conflict sees the world through the filter of their own problems. If someone is burdened with guilt, they easily spot guilt in others. If they live in constant self-criticism, they often criticize others. If someone has a bad conscience, they will jab you exactly where they themselves are weak. The attack becomes a way of reducing their inattention, an attempt to dump their weight outside. What they are telling you is therefore their story, not yours. You can see that story without taking it as your own. You do not have to wear someone else's image. The Buddhist perspective puts it even more simply: a person sees the world as they themselves are. If anger lives inside them, they will see anger everywhere. If they live in distrust, they will detect danger everywhere. If their mind is chaotic, everything you do will seem chaotic to them. When you know that another person's aggression is a reflection of their own pain, you stop taking it personally. You become like a mirror that reflects an image but does not keep it. You do not have to take in what is not yours. When you understand the mechanism of projection, it becomes easier to stay calm in the face of provocation. Instead of reacting impulsively, you can think, "This is not about me." That simple awareness creates distance that protects your emotions. Even a brief pause, 1 second, 1 breath, is enough to separate your identity from other people's issues. External conflict stops leaking into your inner world. You become a witness, not a participant. And this is the most important skill in avoiding disputes that do not belong to you. One of the most effective protective tools is also smoothly changing the subject. When someone tries to provoke you, you do not have to play their game. You can say, "This is not important for me right now, I will answer that another time. Let's talk about something neutral." Such a change of direction works like switching the conversation onto another track. The aggressor loses momentum and you regain control over the meeting's dynamics. It is also worth mentioning that one of the most effective and at the same time most underrated ways of avoiding conflict is a simple, clear, and honest answer: "I don't know." Many people are afraid to use it because they wrongly associate it with weakness, ignorance, or lack of intelligence. So, under pressure, they start pretending, guessing, making things up, explaining themselves, or getting tangled in explanations they do not need, and in this way they pull themselves into a conflict that did not have to exist. Yet "I don't know" does not mean lack of wisdom. It means honesty toward reality and resistance to manipulation. Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers in history, used this sentence not because he had no answers, but because he understood the nature of human beliefs. He knew that a person begins to exactly when they fake certainty where there is none. The answer "I don't know" suspends conflict like an anchor dropped in calm water. It disarms the aggressor because it gives no point of attack. It neutralizes pressure because the other person cannot keep pushing if you have not adopted the role of someone who must explain themselves. It reduces tension because you are not trying to defend your worth or your views, you are simply stating a fact. In provocative situations, "I don't know" acts like a shield that does not deflect blows but makes them find no target. If someone asks you aggressively, "Why did you do that?" and you have no ready answer, you do not have to invent one. You can calmly say, "I don't know, I need to think about it." If someone says, "This makes no sense, why do you do it like that?" you can answer, "I don't know, that's just how it came out in that moment." If someone demands an immediate reaction from you and you do not have one, "I don't know" stops the pressure and gives you back space. This sentence has another power: it is completely resistant to manipulation. Manipulation only works when the other person forces you into a defensive position and you start confabulating, guessing, making excuses. When you say, "I don't know," there is nothing to undermine, nothing to refute, nothing to fight with. "I don't know" does not open a gate to conflict, it closes it. The other person may try to keep provoking, but they are doing so on thin ice now, without support from your reaction. The Buddhist perspective summarizes it even more simply: when the mind does not cling tightly to answers, it becomes free. You do not react automatically, you do not defend the ego, you do not enter into a clash of two beliefs. You become like a calm space in which the other person's aggression has nowhere to settle. "I don't know" is therefore not only a communication tool, it is a practice of humility, awareness, and non-attachment. It is one of the purest sentences you can say in a conflict situation. It protects your energy, keeps your mind clear, and allows you to remain yourself even when someone is trying to knock you off balance. Another elegant method of extinguishing aggression is a short, calm response that gives the other person no point of grip. "I understand, that's possible. All right, I hear you." These are sentences that neither confirm guilt nor join the conflict, and yet do not start an argument. Such answers create in the conversation a soft wall off which barbed words simply bounce and fall away. The aggressor expects emotion, explanations, or a counterattack. That is why they get so lost when they receive a short, neutral message instead. This technique is not about submission, it is about minimizing the amount of energy you hand over to the other person. You decide how much of your peace you keep. Also effective is the method of asking questions that dismantle the logic of an aggressive attack. When someone says, "You did it wrong again," you do not have to explain yourself or defend yourself. You can ask, "What does wrong mean to you in this situation?" Or when you hear, "You never listen," you can answer, "What exactly do you mean when you say a never?" Such questions are not ironic or provocative, they simply bring the conversation down from the level of emotion to the level of facts. And aggression is helpless in the face of analysis, because analysis requires calm and precision. The other person rarely can define their own barbed slogan, and that makes the conflict lose its momentum. In some situations, the most effective tool is silence. Silence in a conversation works like a deep exhale that dissipates tension. Aggressive people do not know how to function without a reaction from the other side. Their attack needs fuel, and that fuel is your emotion. When you remain silent, you give them nothing, not your energy, not your time, not your attention. Silence confuses them because aggression must rest on something, and you are offering no surface. In dialectics, silence is considered the highest form of victory. You have won not by fighting, but by not taking part. Another tool is smoothly changing the subject, but not as escape, rather as consciously directing the conversation toward something neutral. When you see that the other person is trying to provoke you or start a conflict, you can calmly say, "We can talk about this another time." "What are you working on now?" Or, "Let's leave this for later." "How was your day?" Changing the subject does not deny the problem, but cuts off the emotional fuel before the conversation turns into a fight. It is like redirecting the flow of water before it hits the dam. In some situations, the technique of the neutralizing compliment also works. This is not flattering the aggressor, but gently taking away the tool they wanted to hit you with. When someone says, "You're ridiculous," you can answer, "I can see you really care about having everything arranged your way." The attack becomes unsustainable because it has been transformed into something mild and non-confrontational. It is like disarming a weapon by taking it away, except here you are taking away not the object but the intention. It is also good to know the technique of limited agreement, which is especially useful when someone is trying to drag you into a quarrel. Answers like "You might be partly right, I could have done it better, you're looking at this from a different perspective than I am" make it impossible for the other person to escalate. You have not rejected their opinion, but you have not fully accepted it either. You have left a space where there is no room for conflict. This is a form of humility that does not give in, but calms the argument. One of the subtlest and at the same time deepest techniques is Buddhist impersonal observation. Instead of reacting to the aggressor's words, you observe their state. Here is a person in anger. Here is a mind that is suffering. Here is someone who cannot cope with themselves and is shifting the burden onto others. In this approach, there are no enemies. There are only people who have temporarily lost themselves in their emotions. This kind of observation allows you to become space rather than a participant in the conflict. When you look at the other person as someone temporarily overtaken by their own pain, you no longer feel the need to respond with anger. Distance arises, and with it, peace. Ultimately, one of the purest methods is a humble answer that neither fuels the conflict nor lets the aggressor gain the upper hand. "It's possible you're right, I'm still learning, I'm not insisting on my way." These are sentences that quiet the conversation before it gathers speed. The attacking ego is looking for resistance. When it finds none, the fight ends before it begins. Humility in conversation is not weakness, it is mastery over the mind. You also need to learn to recognize people who regularly provoke conflicts. In your environment, there may be those who enjoy dominating, playing with others' emotions, creating guilt, or dragging others into pointless debates. Such people are characterized by a repetitive speaking style. They criticize more often than they speak neutrally. They formulate judgments more often than questions. They speak more often in a fast, loud, and emotional way. Recognizing these patterns is not about labeling anyone, it is about protecting yourself. If you know that a given person always speaks in a provocative way, you can choose a neutral tone from the start and keep emotional distance, and in this way you will not let yourself be provoked. To put this lesson into practice, it is worth creating your personal provocation map, where you write down situations, people, and topics that most often trigger tension in you. Over time you will notice patterns, certain phrases that always used to hurt you, tones of voice that evoke fear, gestures that trigger your defenses. This map is not meant to limit you, it is meant to protect you. When you know your sensitive points, you can respond consciously instead of impulsively. Summary. The most important point in this lesson is for you to know that you are under no obligation to respond to provocation. You have the right to stop a conversation, change the subject, step away, ask about the other person's motive, or simply leave. You have the right not to take part in someone else's game that does not serve your mental health. You have the right to protect your peace just as you care for your body, your sleep, or taking your medications. Conflicts started by others do not have to become your conflicts. You can let them pass, like a storm that soon moves on.